Signs, signs everywhere, signs. Signs for your business and signs for your ride. SignBro's is the place where we make your signs.
Hello.
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 There you go.
Yeah, it's got to be off key. Yeah, perfect.
Good morning. We are the SignBros. Welcome to the YouTube channel. Make sure to subscribe on the link below. And with us, we have Mr. Jeff Limberg from KTSM.
Good morning. Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us, Jeff.
We grew up watching you on TV, and it's an honor to have you
I
here
appreciate
with us.
you saying that. Thank you.
Really
It makes me feel nice and old, so thank you.
And intimidating too, since you're the real voice behind the mic.
The golden voice.
Yeah.
How is it? I'm sure you get your voice recognized wherever you go.
Yeah, it's been great. I mean, El Paso, I get treated like a king,
Nice.
since I've been here. So it's kind of funny. I tell people all the time that, if you're on television, as I was for, a very long period of time, it's funny how people treat you or react to you because everybody feels like they know who you are or they know you, which is great. I've always been a people person. There really isn't anybody that I haven't gotten along with. It's very rare. Athletics was a great way to meet a lot of different people, and I've loved sports since I was about 10 years of age. That's a long time ago. Wow. So that's really that's how it all started. Really, just the love of sports and following teams and. So that's kind of what led to it. But yes, it's been awesome. Yeah.
So are you from El Paso originally?
No, I grew up in the state of Wisconsin.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm the oldest of 10 children.
Wow.
My parents were farmers, and my mom's still around. My dad passed away in 2016, and everybody's still here except one. And so I've still got everybody up north in Wisconsin, my brothers and sisters, and of course they all have families now. It's incredibly huge. So I try to get back up there, and not in the wintertime.
Of course.
That's the reason I'm living here. And so at an early age, I knew I wanted to get out of the state of Wisconsin because of the 6 months of just pure pain of the cold and winter and snow and all the rest. I was not a winter person at any point or time. So that's what led me to the great Southwest. Yeah.
Awesome.
So growing up in the farming, was that kind of expected that you'd stick around back in the day?
Yeah, well,
or?
Dad said he was going to pass it on to me, and I said, no, you can keep it. It's fine. It's all good, And
I'll be fine.
yeah, we had a good laugh about that over the years later. But no, being on a dairy farm, I was exposed to all kinds of different things. It was a great way to grow up because really we lived in rural Wisconsin. We were about 40 miles north of Milwaukee. And so at that time, I'm going back to the 1960s and 70s.
Yeah.
You've heard of those years, haven't you? The 60s and 70s. You read about them. And so, growing up in that environment was great because it was kind of, just the great outdoors. There weren't a lot of people that lived in your area. Everybody was spread out. You spent a lot of time, on the tractors and with the cows and the pigs and the chickens and all those things. And so I knew right away, as even, I would say, 8, 9, 10 years of age,
It's not for me.
this is not really what I'd like to be doing. And so, and of course, the winters. Honest to goodness, the winters were the thing that I just could not stand. From a very early age, I thought, man, this is just a miserable way to live. Because, running your vehicles, just going outside and making sure you don't fall down. And here I was young. And I mean, it was incredible.
Wow.
The ice storms and some of the stuff that went on, it was like, why?
You're talking
What?
hardcore winters.
Oh,
right?
yeah,
You're talking 3-4 feet of snow for days.
You got to be a tough hombre to live in that part of the country, and I am not a tough hombre. So I said, no. I want to just have a nice, warm existence,
So then
No.
you went to college in Wisconsin?
No, well, I actually went to a vocational school. I graduated high school in 1978, and the town that I grew up in, well, basically it's they call them villages or smaller little unincorporated cities. That was always the funny part. We lived in a lot of unincorporated places, but Kewaskum, West Bend, Wisconsin, those are kind of known, in the country. Fond du Lac, people down here at least have heard of Fond du Lac. So growing up there, I graduated in 78, and I had a mass media course in high school, and I was always goofing around in class. That's really kind of what started the whole thing of thinking about maybe that, because this mass media teacher told me, look, you really are a ham. He said, you're kind of a clown. He didn't appreciate some of the comedy, but it was never malicious. It was just goofing around, being a teenager. And he said, you ought to really seriously think about broadcasting, because he was working for a station in West Bend, which was next to our community. So West Bend at that time was about 40,000 people.
Wow.
Kewaskum was only about 1,900 people, where I went to high school. So this gentleman, George Allman, he's the one that really got me to start thinking about broadcasting as a possibility, as a career. Now, at that time, all I was thinking about, I love sports. So, of course, you had Pat Summerall and you had Kurt Gowdy, when I was a kid. Some of the giants of the industry at that time, and I always loved watching those things. I was always intrigued by that, always interested in that, and so that was kind of what got me thinking about it. But George Allman, he was the one that really got me in that direction. So I went to a place called Brown Institute. So Brown Institute is in Minneapolis. So they basically send you out these mailers. He got me in touch with them. So they sent me out this little questionnaire, and it was kind of, do you remember those commercials for the, like, if you want to be an artist, if you draw something, then you submit to draw it, right?
The turtle and the pirate.
Yeah. And I was like, okay. So they said, hey, we want you to send us this cassette. Now, these were cassette tapes. So I had this old cassette recorder.
Nice.
Now, they sent me the cassette. They sent me the packet to send it back to them, and so they gave you a script. And I wish I'd have hung on to that. I think I maybe have the letter that I got that you've been accepted,
Wow.
Which of course was funny because they were accepting everybody. I mean, there wasn't really any,
special about it.
I thought, hey, I made it, And so when I got the letter, that would have been like 1970, my senior year, 1978.
Wow.
And so it was a big deal, and so it was funny because the script itself, they just had like, commercial copy or news copy or what the weather was, like today or whatever, right? And so when I went to Brown, I went there with the intention of becoming a sports broadcaster. That's what I wanted to do. And so it was really on the radio side because I grew up listening to the radio. So Bob Uecker, okay, the great Bob Uecker, who is still doing games today. Okay, he was doing games when I was a kid.
Wow.
Yeah.
So he started in 1971.
Wow.
Okay, so Uke is 85 years old, still going strong. It's
Wow.
unbelievable. But Uke, I remember, laying in the bed with the little transistor radio, and when any of the Milwaukee teams, the Bucks or the Brewers, were playing on the West Coast out here, that was late up there. It's like 10 or 11 o'clock. That was so cool. Put the radio on the windowsill, and lay there listening to games. It was just great. And so that's really kind of what stirred the interest,
Wow.
of doing that. So I wanted to become a sports broadcaster at Brown Institute. So what they did is they had electrical engineering courses, but they also had broadcast courses. So they had radio, television, and then basically electrical stuff that they would set you up with, right? If you want to be an engineer.
Sure.
And in those days, so this was 1980 when I went up there, and so I'm trying to remember. I believe it was late 1979 when I got there, and it was funny because I grew up in, as I said, rural Wisconsin. So when I went to Minneapolis, now this is before cell phones, computers, navigation stuff, right? You remember the big old atlases?
Big old
you could pull
atlas.
it, you had the big booklet,
Yeah.
right? So, well, it was pretty much straight shot, okay? It wasn't that difficult to do. You're on one of the main I roads up there. But I'll never forget, as I was approaching Minneapolis, St. Paul, the heart started pumping. I was 19 years old, and
Wow.
I was like, what am I doing,
Farmer's boy.
And then it was like, okay, it occurred to me, where is the school? Because I had the paperwork, with my stuff, a suitcase and everything that I had with me. And as I'm driving to say, I was like, oh my goodness, well, what's the address of this place?
You were so excited you forgot about that.
Oh my God. And my heart, I can still remember coming over the horizon and seeing, the skyscrapers and this,
Wow.
this gigantic city. And I grew up near Milwaukee, but Milwaukee was not nearly the size of Minneapolis, St. Paul. So anyway, it just was a very, my heart was just cranking. And I'll never forget, I pulled off, and I pulled up to a gas station, went to a payphone. I don't know if people remember payphones. So I go up to the gas station and start pumping in the quarters, and I called the school. And I said, I'm at the corner of blah, 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 and they said, just take a left and come down the street.
Huh.
I was literally within a block of the school.
Wow.
Nice.
Now, it had nothing to do with anything, except maybe the good Lord was watching over me. But I was so terrified living in Minneapolis because I'd never been,
Wow.
exposed
Big
to
city,
the
yeah.
big city, and the driving and the traffic.
Yeah, well, exposed to something
Whoa.
new too as well. Jumping
Yeah.
into farming in high school to straight to what you're
Yeah,
doing.
yeah.
How was
So-
that adjustment?
Yeah, it was interesting. When I first got there, I literally did not go any place besides the school, and then wherever I worked at a grocery store, bagging groceries. And it was funny because there was a place, I'll never forget this, Minnehaha. So up there, a lot of Indian history up in that part of the country. And so Minnehaha Mall was the place that I worked, and so the supermarket was in that place. Well, I only had to drive maybe 2 miles total to get to the store, but I had that little circuit down pat, how to get back. So I was renting the basement of a house with this other guy from Nebraska that was one of my classmates at school. But that first 3 or 4 months, I did not do any. I was petrified to drive. I just didn't want to do it. And here I was, this young farm kid, trying to figure it out. And eventually, it was funny. Almost a year and a half later, I could go any place in the city. I started going to Twins games. That's when Bloomington was still around. The Metropolitan Stadium was still there. So that's now the Mall of the Americas. That's where that is.
Oh,
They basically tore down the stadium Bloomington where the Vikings and the Twins played.
Wow.
And of course, I grew up a Packers fan, but I would go to the Twins game, loved the Twins, going to those baseball games. And so I got used to the big city life, and of course just meeting people.
Sure.
Other people from Los Angeles. We had people from all over the country that came to Brown. And one of my good friends was from Newport Beach, California. Had a ton of money. His dad was actually an advertising agency in California. And so we kind of hooked up, and he kind of really helped me adjust and understand, how to deal with the city, and getting around. So it was great. But, man, those first 3 or 4 months, scared to death.
Oh, I bet.
Scared to death.
And the KTSM, when you were on Channel 9, that was your first gig here in El Paso?
Yeah, that when I first got to El Paso, that was April of 1985. So when I got out of school at Brown, they had a placement service, and it was funny, kind of like that letter I was talking about earlier. They would send letters out, and they'd send cassette tapes out. So you'd do auditions, and just basically put a bunch of things on. So when I was in school, I was going to go there for sports broadcasting, and as it turned out, when I started doing the disc jockey work, I really enjoyed that because you'd spin records and you do news updates and you do the weather,
A little bit of everything.
And then in the sports side of it, all they did is they would send you these small local colleges and high schools, basketball, hockey was a big thing then. Hockey is incredibly hard to do in terms of play-by-play. It's just it's unreal. The pace of the game is so fast, and the line changes and all those things. Anyway, so they gave us a cassette tape. It's about this big. You plop the cassette in there, and you have your little dinky mic, and you'd sit there in the crowd and do the play-by-play like you think you would do it. So you'd have to get your
hands on.
Yeah. So you're basically you're doing the job, but it was hilarious because. You try to find a corner where you could kind of, be tucked away where there wasn't as much noise, because obviously you couldn't hear anything. And so the audio was not very good, but it was a great experience because it really got you how to think, how they prepare, and, this is actually a profession. Wow, okay. And so and we had all of the instructors at Brown were either guys and gals that worked in the broadcasting industry. So some of them were working in Minneapolis in television or in radio. Sure. Some of the guys were like, the hand would automatically go up to their ear. It was hilarious because a lot of the old radio guys, because they didn't have headsets, they didn't have the elaborate equipment that we have available to us today. They would, they'd start cupping the ears. Hilarious, Good morning, So, okay, here you go. And so it's kind of like the old laughing shows with Gary Owens. Was it Gary Owens, the guy that would do, laughing the introductions to the show? There was kind of that feel to it. But once you get into it, it was great. And those instructors at Brown really helped me. Wow. They had all kinds of exercises for you to do. Because coming from the state of Wisconsin, everybody kind of talks like that. Hey, and they talk real fast like that, right? Everybody?
So one word I remember from over there is that glasses. Glasses.
Wisconsin. I used to get it all the time when I got down here. Where are you from? Wisconsin. And so I didn't know I was saying it that way, obviously. But when I go up there to visit, it's always hilarious. Because there are all kinds of different things that are said that you just go, my goodness,
Listen
how
to
do
your
these people
family
communicate?
talk like that?
Yeah, so everybody around the country like that. So anyway, I spoke very fast, and I'll never forget. I had an instructor. He basically gave me a sheet of paper that had all the words together, no punctuation, and he said you have to pick out the words. And so that was a great exercise because if you spoke very quickly, there's no way you could. You had to sit there and you actually had to read this thing. And that was how I learned to slow down. And that was the deal. Just pack a bunch of words, no punctuation, run all the words together, and start doing that. Reading along. And it was very simplistic stuff, But that, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I sat there, and he made me do it with the cassette recorder. And like anything in life, practice makes perfect.
Sure.
If you really want to learn a craft and do it, and I wanted to do it, that was how it started. So back to your question about KTSM, I actually went to Artesia, New Mexico. That was how I got down here. So sent out cassette tapes, sending out the letters, and I get a call from this gentleman named Dave Button. Dave was kind of a legend in the Pecos Valley in Artesia. He owned this radio station. So he went back to the 1940s. He owned the station. He was an old broadcaster. He had the fedora. I'll never forget.
wow.
I took a Greyhound bus from Fond du Lac, Wisconsin to Roswell, New Mexico. And this was 1980. And it was about a 4-day journey.
Wow.
Greyhound.
I'll never ride a bus ever again if I have to. And I get there, and this gentleman, Dave Button, pulls up to the station in this like Dodge Dart or a Dodge vehicle, but it had KSVP, the station letters, on the side of the car, and it was white and red, but these huge letters, on the side of the car. And he walks in, he goes, "I'm Dave Button." I said, "Hey, well, Mr. Button," And the first thing that he did, well, first of all, I got hired. He takes me out to the city, and many people down here know Artesia's not very big. I think even then it was maybe 12,000. Wow. So here I was, I'd gone from the small farm stuff to Minneapolis, St. Paul, where there was always stuff to do.
Back to the...
And then to Artesia, and I mean to tell you, it was the exact opposite feeling that I had about the excitement of being in Minneapolis. To going, and of course my first professional job, I was excited about that. But when I got there, I was like, "Oh my God, there was nothing."
What am I gonna do?
It was so because as there's nothing. You just drive for hours and hours and hours. And here I was, growing up in the Midwest. You always had a city every 15 minutes. You couldn't drive any place without a small village or whatever. But I get to Artesia, and the first thing that Mr. Button did was he drove me out to a water tower. And it was on the outskirts of town. And he says, "You see that?" And I said, "Yeah, it's a water tower." And he goes, "You see all those logos and decals on that?" And so they were like paw prints. So the Artesia Bulldogs were the pride of that community. So their football team had won. They were kind of like the Green Bay Packers of the 60s. They just had all these championships. I think there was, if memory serves me, like 13 or 14 on this huge water tank. And he said that was for each state championship. And that was the first thing he did. That he took me out to, and I'm thinking to myself, "Oh my God, this is it. I mean, this is the big exciting place that I'm going to be starting my broadcasting career." And actually, it was great because, like anything else, the practice was the job. Sure. So I did a morning show. Okay, 6 o'clock until noon was the shift. Wow. 6 a.m. to noon. And it was a country western station. I knew nothing about country. I didn't know any country artists, really. And so I got introduced to that. And they had in the studio, kind of like this place, off to your left were the turntables. So you play these little 45s. And, these record companies at that time, they were sending you boxes and boxes and boxes of records. Wow. And it was hilarious because then I got to figure out who Marty Robbins was and Conway Twitty, and that was right at the urban cowboy stuff. You remember with John Travolta, and Johnny Lee and Mickey Gilley and all those, right? Willie Nelson, of course, he was just really starting to take off then. So anyway, I did that, and then I would do sports on the side. So when I started there, Mr. Button tells me on the telephone, he says, "I'll start you at $700 a month. And then I'm going to give you $50 a month each summertime for 3 months to be the chief engineer." Because the chief engineer was a retired Navy guy who actually spent time in Wisconsin. He would leave on a summer vacation. And at that time, you had to have a license to be a broadcaster. Oh. So I had a first-class license from the FCC that we had to take in Minneapolis, St. Paul, at Brown, which was incredibly, you can't believe this thing. They lock you in this room with pencils, and... What is this? Am I working for the CIA? So you had to have a license to do it. So that's what happened. I had that license, and because of that, all it was just I could read, meters and things at the transmitter site to make sure that we were, doing it properly. Right?
Gotcha.
Hilarious. So that's how it all started, and I worked there for about a year and a half. Then I had a buddy in Carlsbad, New Mexico, that was working in radio, and there was the ABC down here, KVIA. Stanley Marsh was the owner. Stanley Marsh is the guy that in Amarillo, he's since passed away, but Stanley used to bury the Cadillacs in the ground.
Oh, yeah, I
Amarillo.
recognize that name.
Yeah, so he was the guy. Oh, he's the guy with the Cadillacs. You know, say, yeah, he's the guy. He wanted to start a station up in Carlsbad, and they had tried it over the many years. So this friend of mine called me. He said, hey, they don't really care. They're just hiring anybody. You know, and I said, well, what are you calling me for? So he said, well, you're qualified. He goes, they're hiring anybody. He said, and they're paying us a lot more than we're making in radio.
Oh, wow.
And it's basically a startup and blah, blah, blah. And he said, we love sports. So the way that we met, Stan Holden was this guy's name. He was from Iowa. I was from Wisconsin. He was in Carlsbad. I was in Artesia. And we were doing the sports play-by-play for the basketball and baseball teams of Artesia. And he was doing it for Carlsbad. So he called me up and he said, I'm going to be the sports director at this startup thing, you know, okay. So he said, you can watch us. We're on the cable system in Artesia.
Big time.
So I turned this thing on and I'm going, you've got to be kidding. I mean, it was Montana cable. It was some of the worst stuff I've ever seen in my life. And I said, I'm not gonna do that. My God, it was terrible.
Wow.
Terrible. So about 3 or 4 months go by and this guy, Stan, kept calling me. He said, come on, you know, it's going to be great. And really, he just wanted me to be there so I'd have somebody to talk to, you know, quite honestly. So I went down there, and I actually sat down and did an audition tape. So they had kind of just like this. They had a field camera for the studio camera. This is a small little camera. Now, this is 1983, okay? And it was bare bones, absolutely bare bones. And the lighting was terrible, you know, no makeup, any of that kind of stuff. Just sat down. I had my one tie, you know, my one jacket, and there was no teleprompter. And it was, of course, you're talking about sports, so a lot of that stuff, you know, I could just do off the top of my head. Now, as it turned out, the radio start for me was great for that. Because I could already ad lib. I could already, you know, think on my feet a little bit. And when you're typing out the scripts, you're writing it, so you know kind of know what you're saying, or you should. And the guy called me back. He said, "Yeah, we want you to be our weekend sports guy." And I'm like, "You do? Okay." And so I think I was being paid $1,000. I went up from like $750 a month to $1,000. So hey, I was in the big time. I was in the big time dough. And so the station started. And about a year later, it didn't, and so the advertising revenue there just couldn't be generated.
Oh, wow.
And that's why KVA, we got all the programming from Channel 7, so we're ABC affiliate, obviously. And we closed right after the Olympics in 1984. And but it was a great experience, again, just like Artesia. Carlsbad was kind of that next stepping stone. And after everybody got laid off, that's how I met Mr. Pearson, Richard Pearson, who was the general manager at Channel 7. And it was so funny. Richard Pearson became one of my mentors coming down here. I met him for the first time, I think, in '83. And it's funny how life works. When you meet somebody, when I was 23 years of age. And,
wow.
Yeah, I'm Richard Pearson. I said, hello, Mr. Pearson. You just coming through the station with Mr. Marsh. And little did I know what kind of impact that Mr. Pearson would have on my life. But that's kind of how it started, and that's how I got down here to El Paso.
So you started with Channel 7 first?
Started at Channel 9, KTSM. So Carl O'Weiler, the founder of KTSM, was still alive. A gentleman named John Phelan, longtime sportscaster, he was still around. Ted Bender, the weathercaster, was still alive. He was still going strong. Ted had already been here since the early 50s. And all of these guys, Mr. Weiler included, of course, Mr. Weiler started in 1929. So he was still there, and that was a very interesting period of time because we were still at the downtown building, 801 North Oregon. Okay. And so I got hired to do weekend sports, and so man, it was a gigantic step. Again, all these these different moves, small to big, big to small. Now here I'm in El Paso, and it was kind of a whirlwind. I had no journalistic background really, so I was learning all these things. Sure. As I was going, but I had some great friends and people that were helping out. But the bottom line was I always loved sports, so that's really what kind of led to all of it. And so I was very, very lucky.
When you got to El Paso?
I got here, I just turned 25. I got here in April. It was right after UTEP had lost to NC State in the basketball tournament. Was in Albuquerque. That was the year after 1983 when Jim Valvano's North Carolina State team. And so knew nothing about Coach Haskins. Knew nothing really about El Paso in general.
Wow.
And so I really had to get up to speed, And in those days, wasn't making any money. I was making less actually when I came here than I was in Carlsbad, if you can believe that. But it was a job, and I was getting training, and that's the thing that I think young people sometimes forget. Everybody wants to make a living, no doubt. And it was a different time, in 1985. But I was making $11,000 a year, I think. Wow. And so, having an apartment, having a car, all those things, it was tough. And people, that's one of the misconceptions about broadcasting generally, is that, you guys make a ton of money. You guys are, you're on TV, man. You got to be making the dough. And it's like, not really. It's gotten better. But really, unless you're a main anchor or somebody established, you still would have a hard time, making a living. But the point is, if you're young and you're even working here now, it's great practice.
Sure.
You're learning your craft, and if you have grandiose ideas about working in networks, and we've had people that have done it. Tom Costello's an old friend that works at NBC now. He was with us at Channel 7. So from 85 to 88, I was at Channel 9. And Channel 9 was the absolute worst at that time. Ratings were terrible, but Mr. Weiler and the gang did not care because they were bringing in tons of money from the transmitter site up on the mountain. They had all these deals, and they'd been here since 29. So, they were well established. And there really, at that time, there were still only 3 stations, in the market, ABC, CBS, and NBC. So local television still meant a great deal to people at that time. Then in 88, I go with Mr. Pearson to Channel 7. They get the UTEP contract, and that's how and that's how the sports stuff reignited again with the play-by-play. So Fred Albers and I, Fred's my best friend, and Fred and I, we started doing games together. And what a thrill. What an absolute thrill that was. It was fabulous. Yeah, it was fabulous. And so really from that time on, up until 91, I got laid off at 7. Mr. Marsh did a whacking of the budgets, and so I was called in the office and said, hey, we got to let you go. And Lou Romano had just come here then. Okay. So Sweet Lou's at Channel 4 now. He was with us. And so many guys. That's the thing about what I would say all these years later that I've been here. It's the relationships with all the athletes, the coaches, the players, your colleagues. Those are the things that kind of endure more than anything else.
Sure.
All the other stuff is, gravy, really.
What was your relationship like with Don Haskins?
So Coach Haskins, when I first got here, again, I knew nothing about him. And I was just like everybody else, scared to death. I was so intimidated, when I first got here.
When you had like Tim Hardaway in them, huh?
Yeah, well, when I got here in '85, that was the middle of the run. They had just started, really making, hay, a kind of a reemergence of the program. And Jeep Jackson, Dave Feidel, all these great names, Juden Smith, Quentin Gates, Wayne Soup Campbell, all these guys, right? And it was funny because I was close to their age, at that time. And so I always got along great with the players. And Coach really didn't care much for that. And so you have conversations with us about talking to the players, and you don't do that, you can't do this. And so, again, these were all training things that I was learning. And he was great. He was fantastic. And as our relationship grew, it was so funny because Coach Haskins was 55 when I got here. So he was already, he had been coaching since, 61 here at UTEP. And, again, I kind of came in with really no idea. Even though I love sports, I didn't have an appreciation for what he had done in '66 and all those things, the history of it. I didn't really grasp that until much later. But, there were so many great times. And, of course, as he and I both got older, when he retired in '99, we had become very close. And so when all that stuff happened with the movie, when Glory Road first started coming out, I was trying to help him in as much as I possibly could because, again, he was not a guy that he didn't really care about the money. I'm not saying he didn't like money. I'm saying that he never really got with the coaches today of someone of his caliber. Sure. And we understand that it's the economics of where we are. He made a good living, probably better than most people in El Paso, Texas. But the point was he wasn't making the kind of money. So I was trying to help him with all kinds of different things. And so we did the show called An Evening with Don Haskins in January of 2006. And it's still to this day the proudest moment of my life in terms of just things that I've done professionally. Wow. It was so much fun. And how it started was, the show on Bravo, with the professor from that institution,
Inside the actor studio.
Yeah, very good. that was kind of what I was thinking. So I told Coach Haskins, I said, and it was in typical Coach Haskins fashion, I said, Coach, are you familiar with the show on Bravo? And he goes, Bravo, what the hell is that? And I said, well, it's a show they talk about, they talk to actors and people that have made it, their beginnings, and kind of a chronology of their life. And he kind of looks at me, what does that have to do with me? And I said, well, everybody's making money off of you. This is my perception of it. People were making money off of Coach Haskins, and he was the one, along with the players, that really did it. Now, the funny thing is, when Glory Road came out, Disney produced it. Jerry Bruckheimer and all those guys did a great job, tremendous job. And of course, I'm trying to think of the guy that played Coach Haskins, Lucas. His name's escaping me.
Picture his face. I can't.
Yeah, Josh Lucas.
Yes.
Josh Lucas was tremendous, but I saw what that did to Coach Haskins, in terms of he was not in great health. Obviously, he had the heart attack in '96, and then he had the surgery and got into the Hall of Fame. So I got to experience all those things with him. But as we both got a little bit older, I just always had this thing. I was kind of protective of him. That's kind of how I felt about it. I just didn't want people to take advantage of him.
Sure.
So we were doing all kinds of things to try and generate funds for him and his family. And as it turned out, when we did the evening with Don Haskins, the reason that I wanted to do it was because I wanted him to have the ability financially to benefit from what was going on. And he really didn't want to do that, but it took some convincing in the truck driving around El Paso, and parts unknown, believe me, guys. We went to some places in West El Paso driving in his truck at 15 miles an hour, 20 miles an hour. And I'm going, where are we going? I've never even been out to some of these places. Anyway,
Wow.
that's the kind of the evolution of that, how that whole thing got started. So learning about his parents, learning about his brother Jerry. He was just one of 2 kids, growing up in Enid, Oklahoma. That was so much fun. And then the event, we did it at the convention center downtown. And Jim Paul, the former Diablos owner, he really helped me in getting that thing together for Coach. And the day that we're going to do the thing, Coach Haskins is in his bed at his house, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And he's looking at me like he was not doing well. He was always dealing with something. Just the diabetes that he had was just terrible. And so he was struggling. He said, I don't know. And I'm sitting there going, oh my gosh, we got 3,000 people in there tonight. We've already set this thing up. And I told him, I said, but if you don't feel up to it, don't do it. So I knew how he was feeling going into that, and he said, let's go. And he just toughed it out.
Wow.
And the people were awesome. The crowd was so generous and great. And of course, it was just Coach Haskins telling stories. So you can actually go on YouTube and find it.
Oh,
The
the
Evening with Don Haskins. Yeah. I've got.
Look for it.
I'm sorry, was it a one-time show or was
Yeah,
it like
we
a
did it.
weekly
We
show?
did it one evening. No, we did it one evening, and basically it was kind of the chronology of his life, and it was just unbelievable.
Wow.
The energy and the electricity in that arena. And I've been fortunate, to do the games over the years in many exciting places, NCAA's and all those things. But that was just awesome because it made me feel so good about what we did for him, and his stories were just. You got to watch it to really appreciate. The stories were endless. The stories were endless of him growing up, playing for Mr. Iba at Oklahoma State, and just all the great stories about, of course, his teams here in El Paso, and the relationships with famous people. But it was fantastic.
How long was the show? How many hours was it?
We went about 2 hours, and then Channel 7, Kevin Lovell, who's the general manager at Channel 7, he's an old sportscaster like me. He really helped us to put the DVD together. So we actually sold DVDs for a while, and then we had the DVD. I've got some of them still at my house, that I have. But I noticed it was popping up on YouTube, and I was like, "That's awesome," because it keeps Coach Haskins' memory alive. Yeah, yeah. So it was great.
What did Coach think about the movie?
He liked it. And that was the other thing. We did another show at the Plaza Theater on the facts and figures of the movie. And he said, a lot of the stuff that occurred in the film, some of it was embellished because they were coming at it from a race angle. That was really what they wanted to do. They wanted to point out the unbelievable racism that was taking place in the country. But quite honestly, the guys, even Coach Haskins said that wasn't something that really was all that prevalent. There were some places they went, obviously, where it was, that way. But the Neville Shed thing in the bathroom, that did not happen. There was an incident in a hotel room, but it wasn't to that extent. And again, some of these things that, as Coach Haskins says, they needed to embellish it, and he didn't have a great time with the writers. He and the writers did not get along very well. And so, but again, it's Hollywood, The main thing was it got the story out there about the accomplishment of the team. And for the most part, he was pretty happy with it. He had to be part of the production, what they were doing, things that were said, all those things. And he said, in terms of Josh Lucas, he was very happy with Josh's portrayal of him. I really liked it. The one funny part is, when everybody went to the premieres and when you saw the film, so we've all seen the film,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So Coach Haskins, gas station scene, right, where he's the only scene in the movie where Coach Haskins is in the film, where he's putting gas in. And he says, "Hey, you wanted to fill this thing up?" So I think he told me they paid him because he had to get a union card. Because of Hollywood, right?
Yeah.
So he had to get an actor's union card. I think he got paid $600 or something like that for that part. And he said, I called Bruckheimer up. I said, "Could you give me some more lines?" He said, "If I'd have known that, hell." And so, of course, every place that I was at, and I went and saw the film a bunch of times, the place just erupted. When Coach was on, he's in his overalls, and oh my God. And they shot it out there. I think they shot it out in Horizon or Fabens, is where they shot that scene, yeah. And so, you want me to fill this thing up? And he said, "Damn, if I'd have known I could make more money out of more lines.
Wow.
Need some more extra parts.
Yeah. It was just great. It was just awesome. That whole period of time, I think about that often because we just celebrated the 11th year anniversary this past Saturday. September 7th was 11 years since Coach passed. Yeah. So, and he's buried out there out in Santa Teresa. So I go out and visit him, occasionally. I was out there on Saturday. So there hasn't really been a day that has passed that I haven't thought about Coach Haskins or somebody's mentioned something about Coach. I loved him. He was kind of like a second dad, for me. And just those experiences, of what he was as a person, so many things that people didn't know about him that he was doing for people. Yeah. And certainly the coaches and the people that played for him, they knew it. They all know it. And all the guys that were here, Billy Gillespie and Doc Sadler and the late Jason Rabideau and those guys, they got to be around him. And, Doc and Billy loved Coach Haskins. And Doc still talks, and he did when he was coaching, talked to him all the time. And, of course, Tim Floyd. Coach Haskins was like his dad, because Tim lost his dad at a young age. He was 17, I think, 16. And so Tim became a great friend. So all these people, right?
Sure.
Because of Coach Haskins, I got introduced to all these different people over the years that when I go back to what I said initially about growing up in Wisconsin and having dreams about, being a sportscaster, little could I have imagined, being exposed to those things. And it's just unbelievable. Yeah. It's still unbelievable to this day. It really is.
Did you say the late Jason Rabideau?
Yeah, Jason Rabideau, he took over for Coach Haskins.
Yeah.
Jason passed away, and I should know this. I want to say it was 2013 or 14.
Really? Wow.
And he was in Vietnam coaching, and he had an accident. He fell and hit his head. Now, Jason had gained a lot of weight. He was probably over 300 pounds.
Really?
I would say, yeah.
He was young and trim when he was here.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, and it's funny, he went to Marquette. After he left here, he kind of just basically disappeared for a while, and then he got hired by Tom Crean at Marquette. So as a kid growing up in Wisconsin, I was a big Marquette Warriors fan. Al McGuire, they won the national championship in '77. So talking about this sports thing circle, right? Wow. So Jason goes to Marquette, and then he and I kind of rekindle our relationship. Because he left here, it was just the most bizarre thing I've ever seen. His troubles here and, resigning and leaving, and then it was just really bizarre. And Jason and I, from his Marquette days, then when Tom Crean went to Indiana, so Kelvin Sampson is at Indiana, okay? Kelvin Sampson was at Oklahoma with Jason. That's where Jason came from. He came from Oklahoma here.
Gotcha. So
Kelvin Sampson and Jason were dear friends. Kelvin was at Indiana. Then they had a big mess up there with recruiting and, some allegations about illegal recruiting. Wow. So Kelvin Sampson's name in Indiana and Bloomington was mud. Tom Crean goes from Marquette to Indiana. Tom wants to bring Jason with him, and the athletic director's like, nope. No, we can't have anybody associated with Kelvin Sampson. And that was just a bad circumstance. Sure. They just said, well, no, anything linked to Kelvin Sampson is not good news at that time. And so Jason wound up going coaching. He was kind of the nomad. He went all over the place. He was in Bahrain, in the Middle East. He was in Japan. Wow. He went to China. He was in Vietnam when he passed, and it was funny. He used to call me from Japan and from Vietnam, so it'd be like, his 4 o'clock in the morning was like 8 o'clock here or 6 o'clock in the evening, right? And it was just weird. We started texting and writing. He started doing a blog. Jason did this blog. He was a sensational writer. He said, Jeff, do you realize in the United States we have 100 cities with 1 million people, okay? In China, they have like 10,000 cities with 1 million. You know, it's just a phenomenal number. Talking about the number of people, and so anyway, he was just a very interesting guy, and yeah, I mean, gosh, I think he was 49. Wow, he was 49, and he's from my home state. He was born and raised in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, which is in the northern part of Wisconsin, and that's why he and I, when he first came here, we hit it off very well. Wow. And yeah, just unbelievable. Yeah. Really
what was your favorite UTEP team?
I would say it's funny. Everybody thinks the '92 team that upset Kansas, you know, and got to the Sweet 16. That was a great team. That team actually, in retrospect, knowing what I know now, they could have won the national championship. They were that good. They could have done it. They lost to Cincinnati, you know, by a couple of points. Bob Huggins was Cincinnati, and Nick Van Exel and those guys. And but I would say the most fun that I think I've ever had was 1987. UTEP goes over and they beat Arizona on their home court in I think it was a double overtime game, if I remember right now. It's kind of weird. That game was my favorite game of all time.
Wow.
Because, you know, they were there. Steve Kerr was a freshman on that team. Sean Elliott. Of course, yeah, Lute Olson was the head coach at Arizona. And UTEP went in there, and they knocked them off. And a couple of guys had fouled out. So at that time, we had Tim Hardaway still, obviously. Quentin Gates was on that team. Jeep Jackson had some unbelievable plays in that game.
Foster, was he in there?
Greg was not here yet, no. Greg came a year later. There was a guy named Terry Stallworth, shooting guard, you know, off guard. Mike Richmond was a big left-handed shooting center, was great. So all those guys. Antonio Davis was a freshman. They actually played him in that game. And I think in that it was either that game or the next game he broke his leg. He actually fractured his lower leg. But that, to me, that game was so much fun. Chris Blocker, remember Chris Blocker? Chris Blocker was the guy that came running down the floor in regulation and shot what looked to be the game-winning 3 at the buzzer. So Kenny Lofton, the great outfielder with the Cleveland Indians, he was the point guard for Arizona.
Oh, wow.
So Kenny Lofton goes to the free throw line, and I think he had 2 shots. He missed one of them. UTEP grabbed the rebound, and Blocker got it. Blocker was about 6'6", big, strong guy. He comes racing down the floor, comes to the top of the key and lets it fly. And from the minute, I was kind of at mid-court in the press row. When he let it go, because I play basketball, I love basketball, I said, that is going in. That's going to go down. And sure enough, absolutely swish. Wow. And we thought it was a 3 to win the game. So everybody's running around, screaming, yelling, going crazy. And he stepped on the line. So they showed the replay. And so there was just bedlam. So Fred was actually working. I was at Channel 9. Fred was at Channel 7. Fred goes running back to the locker room, and Blocker, Chris Sandel, and somebody else, they had run to the locker room thinking they won the game. And so they were taking off their stuff, and Fred's like, no, you got to get back out here. You know? So they came back out, and that to me was great. And then they lost to Iowa in the next round, but it was a great game. I think UTEP was up 7 or 6 at halftime, and it was just a great knockdown, drag-out game. And that Iowa team, Tom Davis was the head coach at that time. They had a bunch of great players. B.J. Armstrong went to the Chicago Bulls. Brad Lohaus played in the NBA. A guy named Ed Horton. Was it Ed Horton? I can't remember the guy's name. But there are just so many memories. And, you know, I don't know if you guys know this. Fred Albers and I talked about this all the time. Fred says, you know what? You're one of the few people still alive that actually saw UTEP's last NCAA win. I said, what are you talking about? It was 1992. 92. That was the last time UTEP won an NCAA game. That was against Kansas. Yeah. It knocked off number 1 seed Kansas in Dayton, Ohio.
Sweet 16?
And then they went to the Sweet 16 and played They played Cincinnati in Kansas City.
Yeah, that's when they
and that was a wild, you know, experience, you know, doing that, because I got to cover that and got to be a part of the bedlam. I will say this, in terms of memories, UTEP football beating BYU. I was here in '85. I was not at the game. I was actually working on the weekends, and I was at the station. And, you know, I think that was Game 6 of the World Series, St. Louis and Kansas City. I know it was, because that was the famous, infamous, you know, Dane Orridge running down to first base when the Cardinals, you know, got him out at first, and they said he was safe, and that changed the, you know, forced to Game 7. That was going on, and then UTEP, I'm listening to the game. So Taisha's doing the game. We had our sports director, a guy named Tony Debo, at the stadium, and Danny Taylor made that interception return of 100 yards. It was like whatever it was. I think it was 100 even. He ran it back, and it's like, what? What is going on? Is UTEP going to beat BYU? So
That's what BYU had. Was it?
that was
Steve
they
Young?
were no Robbie Bosco. They were the defending national champions.
Oh, okay.
The year before in '84, they knocked off, I think it was Michigan in the Holiday Bowl, and they won the national championship. And of course, they came in here, 51 point, whatever it was, some ridiculous number. They were just, they were just going to, and UTEP had never done very well against, BYU, so that was going to be another whitewash. And UTEP won that game. And it was hilarious because I'm getting calls the entire night. Have you heard what the Miners are doing? It's like, yeah, I heard what the Miners are doing. Yeah, and then we got this baseball game. It was unreal. And so years later, people said, were you at the game? I was not at the game. I was not. Thank God I was not, because it was crazy. Because people started going to the stadium. People were hearing it around town. They started just going to the game because there was nobody there to start the thing. Maybe like, I don't know, 15,000 people in the stadium, maybe.
Wow.
And that thing started to fill up, and it was just pure bedlam. Just absolute bedlam. So that was a good one. Yeah, that was a great one.
We grew up in northern New Mexico, so we grew up Lobo fans.
The great Norm Ellenberger.
Yes. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Storm and
So
Norman.
We came to El Paso in about '89, so that's when we started listening to UTEP basketball.
Yeah.
So we didn't really know much about UTEP football before that.
Yeah.
So till about '89, '90, and then I think it was
Reggie
about,
Barrett. I
92.
remember Reggie Barrett, like
92.
Wide receiver, you bet. Yeah.
Yeah, he was great.
Storm and Norman was here with Coach Haskins, of course. Norm Ellenberger,
Yeah, great coach.
one of my all-time favorite people. That again goes to, are you kidding? You're going to meet, these kind of people? Storm and Norman was so good in terms of his ability to coach kids, and that's why Coach brought him here. That's what caused all the NCAA trouble for us, in UTEP. I had an old friend. I'm reminded of this when I say us. There was a sports information director at New Mexico State, guy named Steve Shutt, who's now at Wake Forest all these years later. Steve, when I would say us or we, that kind of thing, I would be talking to him. He goes, "Oh, are you suiting up tonight? Are you coaching the team? So when UTEP got in trouble with the NCAA in those mid '90s, early '90s stuff, that's what that stemmed from. Because the coach brought Norm in here. Because Norm was basically blackballed after the New Mexico scandal, But Norm was just, you talk about a great person. Norm Ellenberger was one of the great people of all time. He just was a sweetheart of a person. And he coached UTEP, that 1 year, I think it was 1990, he coached him in the tournament because Coach Haskins had that bout with laryngitis. Lost his voice. He actually lost his voice. They didn't know what was going on. And Storm and Norman came in here and coached him. And I want to say that was the year that UTEP lost to Minnesota in the first round at Richmond, Virginia. They lost. That was the Henry Hall team with a bunch of different guards. Henry was kind of a three-point shooter, but Greg Foster was on that team.
Antonio Davis probably still.
Antonio Davis, yeah. Tim was gone, but Prince Stewart was on that team.
He was a good player.
Yeah, a bunch of different guys.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh man, trip down memory lane. Those are great. Those are great memories,
Yeah,
guys.
good memory.
Real quick question for you,
Yeah.
man. I got real quick. What do you think is causing? Why is the UTEP sports in such a slump right now?
Yeah, it's funny. I've been asked that question forever. And when Coach Price was here, honest to goodness, speaking of great people, Mike Price, when he was here, I really felt at that time that there was a corner turned. The facilities were unbelievable. I mean, getting the Durham Center built, that's a credit to Bob Stoll. Paul Foster, the businessman here in town, unbelievable what he's been able to do for the school. Russ Vandenberg has always been a great contributor to the school.
Was it Larry Durham?
Yeah, Larry Durham.
He's the one that.
Larry's a terrific guy too.
lot of money.
Larry scored the first touchdown in the Sun Bowl Stadium back in 1963, I think.
Wow.
And it's hilarious. He said, "Yeah, it was a 100-yard run. I think it was a 61-yard run. He was a running back." And so the story's always he's another terrific person. Larry Durham done so much for the school. But the facilities, that's no longer a reason. Conference USA, I don't think has been great for UTEP. There's some people that disagree about that. I'm kind of the old WAC, I love the old Western Athletic Conference because that's what I know. That's where I grew up. I still have friends at different schools. The guys at Wyoming, they'll come to town and we'll go out and have breakfast or whatever. It's hilarious. And that's really what I think's happened is that there's a disconnect for the fans because they really don't know what Conference USA is. And again, because of the bizarre nature of the TV contracts today. You know, local stations really can't do anything. The pricing has gone sky high.
Wow.
All the league agreements that they have, you know, Conference USA, they basically take over for anything that the local schools want to do most of the time. And it's a commuter school. At the end of the day, I think when it's all said and done, because UTEP's a commuter school, that's really why. And, of course, the performance of the football team and the performance of basketball most recently hasn't helped them. And it's just in a tough position. You really are. I mean, Jim Center coming in there, trying to do it his way, you know, man, good luck to the man. Because it's tough sledding.
Yep.
When I left UTEP 2 years ago, I basically just, like I did when I was in TV, when I was the news director for the last 2 years of my illustrious career at Channel 9. That's what got me into sales, because I was a lousy manager. I hated every second of it, and I got into sales. And thank God, because that really was beneficial for myself and my family. But the funny thing is, all the things we talked about right now has helped me immensely in my sales career. Because like you guys, hey, it's Jeff, and so that's what I get. Or, hey, you're Fred Albers. No, I'm not Fred Albers. I'm Jeff. Hey, you're Kevin Lovell. No, I'm not Kevin Lovell. Hey, try this one. I'm Chip Taberski. When I first got, I said, no, I'm not Chip either. So it's funny. My wife would always say we go to stores, with Sam's or Walmart, wherever we are, and people come to me, hey, Kevin, how you doing? I said, I'm doing great, And so my wife would say, for God's sake, tell them. I said, they're not. What are they doing? They like me. They don't know my name, but they're being nice to me. They're not coming up to me and saying, hey, you jerk, They're just being sweet. And so that's kind of what it's been like my entire life here. People just have been so nice. And, again, they treat you like a king, or as Dave Ramsey, one of my favorite, financial guys, I get treated better than I deserve. And that's kind of how I feel most of the time. Because people are just, sweethearts. They're being nice to you, And listen, as you've discovered, I don't mind yakking about things. That kind of stuff, I could sit for days and talk about, even if it was just Coach Haskins. I haven't even mentioned Lou Henson, who's still alive. Lou and Mary, they became friends. He was sensational. Charlie Bailey, another one that was just great. Charlie unfortunately lost his wife Gail in July. And I talked to Charlie about 2 weeks after the passing of his wife. 57 years they were together.
Wow.
And just to hear his voice, he's still going strong. I think Charlie's 78 now. I talk to Coach Price every couple of months. Tim Floyd, I talk to Tim every chance I can get. Phil Johnson, who was an assistant here for Tim. Dirk Cutter, who was a coach for Bob Stoll back in the 80s when the UTEP really got it cranking in football, had the 10-win season in 88 Independence Bowl team. Dirk was our offensive coordinator and quarterback coach. And Dirk and I remain friends to this day. And he's now back with Atlanta. He's the offensive coordinator with Atlanta. So, texting him.
Yeah, I was going to say, his name sounds
he was at Tampa Bay. He got a raw deal at Tampa Bay, I thought. But anyway, it's the life of the NFL. And he's been all over the place. He's coached at many, many different places. But there's so many people. My gosh. It's astounding sometimes. And now with social media, as you guys know, the only thing that I use, the only platform I use is LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the only place that I really go because it's more of a business to business. It's great for a person like myself, the fisherman, for looking for new clients. Yeah. And so I'll go on there, but it's funny. Some people will say, hey, I get these alerts, like this guy or that guy. So this quarterback that played for us back in the 80s, early 90s, a guy named Howard Gasser. Howard had tremendous arm, unbelievable, but injuries kind of plagued him. And David Lee was here. The team didn't do very well. And he just got caught after Bob Stoll left here, But Howard and I, can you believe all these years later, that it's almost like picking up a conversation with a good friend. And he just goes, oh my God, And I sent him a picture of me. I took a selfie of myself and I sent it to him. I said, haven't changed a bit. And he goes, oh my God. We laughed. It's just hilarious. And there's just a litany of stories, right? Sure. And of course, as I approach my age 60, I'm going to be 60 next year. I can't believe I'm even saying that. Then I'm kind of the old guy. Hey, we grew up with you. We watch us. Thank you. It's all very complimentary. But now, all of these athletes, all of these coaches, some still coaching, some retired. It's just been unbelievable. Nice. Because we know things about one another. It's just can you believe this? It's really ridiculous. all the years that have passed, and just all the great things. And it's certainly, to your question about UTEP, listen, we've had how many years, of winning football? It hasn't happened very much. I've been part of all the bowl games since 1967. Which is, you say to yourself, well, what? Okay, so there's 1988. Yeah. Then when Coach Price got here, that was, 2003, 2004. Well, actually 2004, 2005. And then went to the Mexico Bowl, right? Then when Cougs was here, went to the Mexico Bowl again. So, I was part of all those, all those bowl games, right? And you say to yourself, that's not him. It's like 5 or 6, in that length of time since 1967. Yeah. So it's been no great shakes, for anybody. So the answer to that question is I have no earthly idea. I don't know what the issue is. They're working on the stadium right now, but since I'm out of it, I talk to John Teicher every once in a while, and John, he is a UTEP lifer. He's going to be the Vin Scully of UTEP. He's going to keep rolling. And which is great, he loves what he does. It's real obvious, and so all those guys, I've kept those relationships with. But yeah, it's the unanswerable question: why can't we succeed here on a consistent basis? Because the facilities, the weather, the people, we all know we all know these things, right? I tell people all the time, shh, don't tell anybody, about El Paso. I like it the way it is. I'm kind of old school about that. Yeah. I don't want us to be San Antonio. I don't want us to be Phoenix. And there are some people like, my God, we've got to have something to do. And it's like, I'm getting on, in years. I don't really need a whole lot to do. I got my remote, I got my direct TV, I got my football games, and I'm fine. But I understand it, the changes in the town and different philosophies and things. But I'm kind of on the way, heading that way. And, and people that want to do things, a good friend of mine used to say, I've got far more yesterdays than I have tomorrows. And I used to say, what are you? That's not a very nice thing to think about yourself, but it's true, I mean, I got more yesterdays than I got tomorrows, so I don't really get angst about a whole lot of stuff, anymore. And since I've been out of it with the UTEP stuff, it doesn't mean that people don't come up to me and say, oh, what's wrong? I mean, I got a guy at Avila's restaurant, been a friend forever, Andy Avila, and about 3 years ago, he says, what's wrong with your minors? And I go, my minors?
My minors?
I said, I didn't know they were mine. I said, you can have them if you want them, And he goes, and so that has been a continuous thing too. And even though I'm not part of it, I don't want people to think I don't really care, but I don't really care. It's just something that, if you have an opinion about it, that's fine. But I don't really have an opinion about it because I'm not around it anymore. Sure. I don't know anything about the players. I don't feel educated enough to really say, what are we going to do? It's like, I have no idea.
Yeah, like now you said, who's the basketball coach?
Yeah, Rodney Terry, yeah.
Terry.
Rodney
right?
Terry, yeah.
Yeah, see,
From Fresno State, yeah.
Yeah, I remember the name. It's not interesting to follow for me anymore, man.
Well, and that's that, right?
Unfortunate.
And we live and work here, right? And so, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of it that I feel badly about. There's some of it that I don't feel badly about, but those are all personal things. I have no animus towards anybody. UTEP, John Teicher is one of my best friends, and Bernie Riccono on the football games, he's a hoot. Just had lunch with Bernie last week, as a matter of fact. And so, all these relationships, at the end of the day, that really is it. Yeah. It's the friendships and relationships that you've had with people, and it's just great to be able to kind of take that trip down memory lane. Sure. So thank you guys. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
And you said that people recognize you a lot. It helps with their business and stuff too. So you do advertising for KTSM?
Yeah, for KTSM Television. So we're owned by Nexstar Media Group, and we just built a new facility on the west side. We're off of Sunland Park in Constitution. We're right now, ironically, we're right next door to Shamali Buick GMC. So the automotive industry, they've done great for advertising in the El Paso marketplace, not just for television, but for everybody. So thank you to all the car dealers, out there.
Shout out.
And and I've been there since 2016. Before that, I was at Entravision Radio with 92.3 The Fox, and they have Univision Channel 26. So right now, when I mentioned earlier about Mr. Pearson, and another giant in the industry was Jim Phillips, who passed away recently. All those guys, they were kind of my mentors, but it was so different. No social media, no internet, a lot of these things that have changed the dynamic of the industry, right? So now everybody basically can be a correspondent, really. That's kind of what it's turned out to be. So the station that I work with, the group that I work with, the guys are great. We have a sales team of about 8 or 9 people. And I'm kind of the elder statesman on the staff, so they get to listen to me ranting and raving about things occasionally. But they put up with me, and again, treated like a king. It's really a great blessing.
Gotcha.
And the guys that I work with are great. And so the new facility, it's brand new shiny toy. It's great. You guys got to stop by. So I'll give you the nickel tour. Yeah, I'll give you the nickel tour.
Well, I mentioned that to any of our previous guests, business owners that want to advertise. Make sure they get a hold of you.
If they mention this podcast, they get a 50% on that.
Is it 50 now? We're gonna have to negotiate that.
Oh, okay.
It could be less. It could be more.
That's how
It depends on what they say about the podcast.
So they can contact you straight through KTSM, or you want to give a number out or email out? Or?
Yeah, my email address at KTSM is J Limberg, my last name, Limberg. No relation to Charles Lindbergh, unfortunately. So it's Limberg at KTSM.com. And shoot me an email or give me a holler anytime. So appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks for your time,
coming
man.
in.
Wow.
Thanks for the stories. We appreciate it. Like I said, it's we growing up.
Thank you, I think. Yes.
That's it, man. KTSM. A lot of those, seeing the highlights of Michael Jordan, the Bulls. Great memories, man.
Yeah, we're great.
Thanks for coming in, Jeff.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you,
Alrighty.
Jeff.
Appreciate it.
We want to invite you to subscribe to our channel. Thank you to Jeff and all our sponsors. We're up in your business. We're the SignBroCast. Thank you for joining us. We're signing off.
Have a good day.
SignBros is the place